Hello and welcome back to the Healthy Middle Ground podcast with me, Jen Curtis. What I want to talk about this week is nutrition. I want to take a potentially enormous topic that can be very complicated and confusing and just try to really simplify it. I want to make it as simple as possible. And I want you to go away from this podcast with the most straightforward understanding of nutrition and what good nutrition means and what you need to get from your diet, what that means, and sort of dispel a lot of the confusion, because it can be confusing online, right? There's a lot of contradicting information. It seems like everyone has a different spin on things. But you've got to remember that the online space is created what it often amplifies is very extreme voices or things that are fear-mongering or things that are kind of brand new information, you never knew this about grapes or whatever. And it's just unnecessarily complicated. It's just unnecessarily creating layers of complication and often focusing on things that just don't matter. What I like to call majoring in minors and not focusing on the big rocks. So, in this episode, that's exactly what I want to do, is strip away all of the myths and fear mongering and just kind of overcomplicating, majoring in minors, and just get it down to the bare bones of what good nutrition needs and what you need to know about nutrition for you and your family, because it's really not that complicated and there is no conspiracy or secret, right? What contributes to good nutrition is very, very, very well established in science. We know what we need to be healthy, yet people online often create kind of false sort of conspiracy or drama around things, because we have that tendency as humans to prefer things that are kind of sensational rather than just boring and just the basics, because that's what most of nutrition is about, right? It is really just about the boring basics for the most part, and there really isn't that much that's exciting and certainly not sensational about it. Before I dive into my kind of spiel on nutrition and what makes good nutrition and what you need from your diet, I want to, first of all, just introduce you to 5 really important concepts that I think are really important to understand in life, but they're really important to understand in nutrition. So, okay, the first concept that you need to understand in order to understand nutrition is that, I was introduced to this idea when I first became a personal trainer 10 years ago, and we had an introductory course to nutrition, and the lecturer stood up and the first thing he said is Physiology 101. The first thing that you need to know about nutrition, about the way the body works, about everything, is that everything is a poison. It's just dependent on the dose. And if you think about it, right, we tend to think of things as either being toxic or not toxic, but it's not a binary. Everything is toxic in certain dosage. So for example, water's good for you, right? But if you drink enough water, you will literally die, right? There is, for every single thing, there's a range of how much is good for us. There's sort of the minimum that we need, there's the optimum that we need, but then there's too little and there's too much, okay? So water is a great example of that. Broccoli is really, really good for us, right? But if you eat 5 kilograms of broccoli, you are going to be shitting through the eye of a needle. You're going to have some really bad digestive distress. Too much broccoli is not good for you. And that's the same with everything, okay? So a lot of nutrition online is don't eat this, it's toxic, this has this in it, this has that in it. There's a lot of fear mongering around also preservatives and food dyes and things that are artificial. But again, the dose makes the poison. And that brings me to my second really important concept to understand is the appeal to nature fallacy. So the appeal to nature fallacy says that if it's natural, it's good for you, and if it's artificial, it's bad for you. But this is a false dichotomy. Again, this isn't true. So some things that are natural are very, very bad for us. So snake venom, for example, is 100% natural, but it can kill you. Whereas there are many things that are artificial and are made in a lab and have a name that you can't pronounce or your grandmother couldn't pronounce, and they are perfectly fit for human consumption. They are not poisonous at all. So this is the appeal to nature fallacy, that if something is artificial, then it is by extension also bad for you. And this simply isn't true. So a lot of medications that we take, paracetamol, lots of things, although they may have side effects, they are not dangerous for us to take in certain dosages. And this is true also of food dyes, of sugar, of artificial sweeteners, of lots of things that are artificial. The dose makes the poison. And there are many, those artificial things, if they are consumed in certain quantities, they are perfectly safe. Whereas there are many things that are 100% natural that even if they're consumed in a very small quantity, they can kill you. They are really, really bad for you. So if you grow mold on your cottage cheese, for example, and then you eat it, again, this is 100% natural, but it's probably gonna make you pretty sick. Okay, concept number 3 is the idea of bell curves. And I don't hear many people talking about this. It's really important to understand that for everything in life, there is a distribution across a bell curve. Okay, so what that means is if you take a graph of any particular trait, let's take something that's got nothing to do with nutrition, something like height, okay, and you plot on a graph, like on the vertical axis, the number of people, and then on the horizontal axis, someone's height, okay? What tends to happen is that people gather around the mean. So you end up with like normal human distribution of most traits looks like a bell curve, okay? So what you end up with is most people, like the tall bit of the bell is in the middle, okay? So like around, I don't know, 5'6" or something like that, that most people will be around that height. The vast majority, the part of the bell that becomes very high is that's how many people are that height. And most people tend to be around the mean. So you do get some people who are very, very short, and you do get some people who are very, very tall, and they are on the far ends, the extremes of the bell curve, where the curve comes down and starts to get close towards the bottom of the graph. This means that, remember, on the vertical axis is the number of people. So you get very, very few people on the ends of the bell curve, okay? So some people are very, very short, and some people are 4 foot tall in the world. There are some people who are like 8 foot tall in the world. Then as you move closer to the center and you get to like 6'5" and I don't know, 4'8", right? You're going to have more people than at the extremes of height, but there's still not very many people there. And then as you get closer towards like the middle of like 5'6" or something like that, that's where you have most people gathering around 5'6", 5'4", 5'10". Obviously there's a difference between the sexes, male and female as well. But like if you took all humans, they would show this kind of distribution for height. This is the same for a lot of nutritional things. This means that like most people are just gonna need to follow the most basic nutrition guidelines, and they are going to be like the majority of people, and like you are not the exception, you are probably the rule. So for example, I'll come back to this a bit later on, but this is where like the carnivore diet, right? And fiber. Most people need quite a lot of fiber in order for their gastrointestinal tract to work well. So most people gather around the mean. Some people work well with exceptionally high fiber diets, and some people do well with exceptionally low fiber diets, but they're very, very few and far between. And most people are just around the mean, around what's average. And this is true for every single everything in nutrition and everything in life. Remember what I said about social media? It tends to promote the extremes. It's more interesting, it's more sensational, but the extremes may apply to some people some of the time, but they probably don't apply to you. Number 4 is the concept of trade-offs. There's an expression that I love from Thomas Sowell. There are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And I can't remember where I wanted to tie that into my nutrition lesson, but I'm just going to leave that there because I wrote it in my introduction. But this idea of trade-offs is that, you can't have all the things all the time. If you want one thing, you normally have to sacrifice something else. And often understanding a topic is also understanding the trade-offs involved in a particular topic. And finally, the last concept I want to leave you with is the idea of dogma and ideology versus evidence-based principles. So there are lots and lots of dogmatic approaches to nutrition, like carnivore, like keto, like veganism. There are many others, like Whole30, and they normally have a list of very strict, often quite arbitrary rules, and they are not normally evidence-based. Whereas if you follow evidence-based principles, things that we know to be true through the scientific method, right? Things that we have tried to prove, like science works in a way that if we think something's true, if we have a hypothesis, we try to prove that it's not true. We try to disprove it. We try to find evidence to the contrary. And as we build up evidence around a certain principle, we believe it to be more and more and more true. That's a lot less exciting, a lot less sensational than just like, don't eat vegetables. Vegetables are going to kill you, right? It's not as clear cut, okay? So understanding like evidence-based principles around nutrition means understanding the gray area, means understanding often it's a lot less clear cut, and we'll say things like, well, it depends. And on one hand, there's this, and on one hand, there's that. There's trade-offs, right? There are various things to consider at any one time. But it's important to realize that there are evidence-based principles around fat loss, around nutrition, around exercise, things that we know with a very high degree of certainty that are probably true. We have best practices. We have things that we know are true for most people most of the time. And those principles are what I'm going to go over now. So that was my kind of like part 1, some 5 really important concepts I think you need to understand in order to understand nutrition, but also to understand fat loss, also to understand anything else in life. And they're things that I keep coming back to, and I try to thread through my coaching, through my podcasts, through my like Jen Curtis Academy, that my clients have access to. These are really important principles to just understand how they govern many things in life. With that said, let's move on to part 2 of this podcast, and let's just talk about like this is the bit where it's just like, this is what you need from your diet, right? This is the most simple lecture on nutrition that you're ever going to get in your life. There are 5 things, okay, 5 nutrients that you basically need to get from your diet, okay? 5 things. 1 is protein, 2 is fats, 3 is micronutrients, so vitamins and minerals. 4 is fiber, and 5 is water, okay? These are the 5 things that you must get, right? 5 nutrients that you must get from your diet in order to be healthy, okay? These are things that you have to ingest every day or most of the time. Now, I'm smuggling a lot in here because there are obviously lots of different types of proteins. There's lots of different types of fats. There are lots of different micronutrients. There's lots of different vitamins, lots of different minerals. And of course, there are lots of different types of fiber as well. But basically, that is what you need to get from your diet. That's what good nutrition is about, right? And it's more about ensuring what you get what you're actually getting through your diet, through your food, rather than what to avoid. This is another important point about nutrition, that a lot of people kind of fearmonger and say, oh, you've got to cut out sugar, or you've got to cut out carbs, or you've got to eat a low protein diet, whatever it is, right? Low vitamin A diet is something that I've seen recently, like whatever. People focus a lot, when a lot of nutrition online focuses on what you should avoid, what you should cut out of your diet, what you should never eat. But that's not really the right way to look at nutrition. You want to look at nutrition in terms of what things do you need to get from your diet? What nutrients do you need that your body actually uses in metabolic and physiological processes? And you need to try and get that through your daily and weekly diet rather than trying to avoid things. Like, being healthy isn't about avoiding gluten. It's not about avoiding sugar. It's not about avoiding processed foods. It's about ensuring that you get these 5 nutrients from your diet. And that's a very different way of looking at nutrition than just thinking about it in terms of this isn't healthy, this isn't healthy, this isn't healthy, don't eat this, don't eat that, don't eat the other. Okay, so let's go through some of all of these 5 things and just give a little bit, bulk it up just a little bit. So in terms of how much you need of each thing. So protein first, okay? There is also a range that you need that will be healthy for you, okay? And that range covers the absolute minimum that you need to avoid disease and malnutrition, all the way to what we consider to be the upper limit for safe consumption. And somewhere in between, there is optimal consumption of something. But people throw a lot of numbers around when it comes to nutrition in terms of protein, for example, that you must get 2 grams. This is particularly common in the bodybuilding space. You must get 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And some people even go as far as saying 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight, which starts to get absolutely ridiculous. But they often throw around a single number that you must get this amount. Otherwise, everything else is wrong. But there's actually a range that will work. So let's talk about what that range looks like for protein. There's the absolute minimum that you need, which has been identified as 0.8 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight. And obviously, ideal body weight is a range as well, right? There isn't just one ideal body weight for everyone. There's a range at which you can be healthy. This is very, very low. So if you are a 60 kilo female, well, also if you're a 60 kilo male, you need something like 45 grams of protein a day, okay? 0.8 of your body weight. Why do we say ideal body weight? That's because if you weigh 100 kilograms, right, but you're 5'6" and you're 40 kilograms overweight, so you've got 40 kilograms of excess body fat, right? You don't need more protein just because you've got more body fat, right? Body fat doesn't require more protein. So you just take what your ideal weight is. Again, it's a range, but you can just pick a weight that's in the middle of a healthy weight range for your height, a healthy BMI, that's also appropriate. And if that's 60, again, you want to calculate your protein needs based on your ideal body weight. Okay, so that's the lower end. You must get more than 0.8 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight if you want to avoid diseases and malnutrition that are caused by insufficient amount of protein. Most people in the West are getting that. It's not very hard to get that amount. It's a very, very small amount, but it's nowhere near optimal, okay? So for everything, there's a minimum, but then there's a more optimal range. As far as I can tell, in the evidence-based community, when it comes to nutrition and training, the upper end of optimal is 1.6 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight. Okay, so that is quite low. If you compare it to the bodybuilding stuff that I mentioned a moment ago, where they say 2 grams per kilogram or even pound of body weight, 1.6 grams is actually pretty low. But it's the most, as far as I can see, from evidence-based, research and data that we have, there is no need for anybody to eat more than 1.6 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight. Now, if you weigh like 60, 65 kilos, that's going to mean something like, for most women, that's going to mean around 100 grams of body weight, 100 grams of protein per day. Most women will need that. If you're particularly small, you might need less. If you only weigh 45 kilos, you're not going to need that much. If you are, 5'10" and weigh 70 kilos, you're probably going to need a little bit more. 1.6 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight is like the most that we can really absorb. And if you really want to, this is if you're training hard in the gym and trying to build muscle and recover from intense workouts. Okay. So if you do fit that description, despite what a lot of the bodybuilding space says, you don't need more protein than that, right? If you really want to make sure that you're getting enough, you can go up to 1.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. That will give you more than enough buffer per day to make sure that you're getting enough. But there's really no need to get more than that. But then we can also define safe limits, right? So like a lot of people say that high protein diets are bad for your kidneys and things like that. Actually, that's not true. As long as you have healthy kidneys, like there doesn't seem to be an upper limit in terms of what's safe. And I think the highest number that I've seen that's been tested is like 4.5 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight per day, which is an insane amount of protein, but it still is safe to consume. It's unnecessary, it's excessive. It's probably not going to cause you any health problems, but it's probably going to cause you either to consume too many calories, or it's going to prevent you from consuming other nutrients that you need. But it's not actually dangerous in terms of like too much protein. It's just wasteful and unnecessary. If you don't train hard in the gym, you probably don't need as much as 1.6 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight. And you probably need something more like 1.2 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight, right? If you're not recovering from workouts and you're not like pushing the weights in the gym, you just don't need that much protein. Your body won't have what to do with it, right? And our bodies if we consume excess protein, it will be stored as fat, right? So we don't want to consume those excess calories that we don't need will be stored as fat. So there's no need to eat more than your body can like process. Okay, so there's a range. Okay, so for most people, it's going to be between 1.2, like an ideal amount of protein consumption is between 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight per day. You can probably get away with a bit less, but it's not ideal. You can get away with a bit more, but again, it's not ideal. So you probably just want to stick within this range, and you don't need to be like crazy about it, right? It doesn't matter if one day you get a bit less, one day you get a bit more. It's just about being more or less around that range. Why do we need protein? I probably should have said that a moment ago, but we need protein for, obviously it's well known for like building and repairing muscle and things like that. But basically every tissue in the body needs protein, right? And we need protein for like repair, for building, for recovery. So it's really, really important to be getting enough protein through your diet. And most women are not getting enough protein. Most women tend to overconsume fats and carbs, and they just don't get enough protein in their diets. It's really important for satiety as well. It's really important for the thermic effect of food. But most women that I work with, we increase their protein intake to something more reasonable, not just for the muscle building, for the satiety that helps with fat loss, but also just for long-term health. You need a high protein diet. And again, the definition of a high protein diet is in that range that I said. You don't need to go bonkers with this. And this is another concept that I should have added into my introduction. Something my granddad always used to say is there's a difference between scratching your ass and tearing it to pieces. And I just think that always sticks with me. Like, people tend to go so far with things like, okay, if protein's good for me, then I'm going to eat a shit ton of protein. It more must be better. And women do this with fats. If fats are good for me, I'm just going to eat as much as possible, right? There is such a thing as too much of a good thing. Again, the dosage makes the poison. So don't, throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't get carried away, right? There is always a range that's healthy. It's not always a case of more is better. Same with exercise. More exercise is not always better. There is a point at which you start experiencing diminishing returns on your investment. And then there's a point at which it starts becoming detrimental, right? Exercise is very good for you, but too much exercise is very bad for you. Okay. So again, everything is like exists within a range of minimal to ideal to optimal and then to too much. Okay, let's move on to fats, okay? Because again, lots of different types of fats, lots of different types of fatty acids, but we need a certain amount of fats in our diets in order to be healthy. And again, it's a range. It's somewhere between the numbers that I have that I found to be most reliable are between 20 to 40% of your overall caloric intake should come from fats. Now, I think this is probably not the best way of doing it. I think it should be like protein, where we do it per kilogram of ideal body weight. But anyway, that's not how it's done for one reason or another. But instead we use percentage of overall calorie intake, and it's somewhere between 20 and 40%. Now, 40% is probably better for optimal health, right? We need fats, among other things. Again, we need it for lots of processes and lots of tissues in the body. We also need fats for good, proper hormone health. So a lot of our hormones are made out of fats in part. And women need a higher fat intake than men do on average. We have a higher body fat percentage than men on average. And we do need more fats in our diet. I can't remember exactly what the numbers are for men. If you are trying to lose body fat, it can be helpful to reduce your fat intake because fats are very, very high in calories. They have twice as many calories, more than twice as many calories per gram than carbohydrates and proteins. So fats will not make us particularly full, and so it can be useful to reduce your fat consumption when you are dieting. But you don't want to go below about 20% of your overall intake, especially not for long periods of time. Because it will affect your long-term health, not because it will affect your short-term hunger. That is a bit of a myth. A lot of people say, oh, add fats to your meals to increase hunger. And that's actually the worst way of of improving your hunger. You're actually just going to add a bunch of calories and not much satiety. People say it's going to slow gastric emptying and things like that. But no, you actually want to add foods that are very filling and have a lot of volume per 100 calories and that's the opposite of fats. And again, like I said before, most women are consuming way too much fat in their diet. So if you look at like their consumption, it's often much higher than 40% of what their calorie intake should be. Now, if you're in a surplus, if you're gaining weight, then you're eating overall too much food. And if a lot of that is coming from fats, that is going to be like too much fat, right? You're overall consuming too many calories and you're consuming too much fat for what you need. Most women are just sort of going, oh, you need healthy fats on your food. So they make a salad and they put loads and loads of olive oil, free pour the olive oil, a fatty thing like salmon. They put on seeds and nuts and avocado, and there's just way more fat than your body actually needs. So just like protein, you don't need beyond a certain amount. Yes, we all understand now that fats are important and fats are good, but there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. And most women are massively overeating on fats and need to cut them down quite drastically. An important thing to say about fats is omega-3. It's an essential fatty acid. That means that our body can't make it from other fatty acids. So if you're not getting enough omega-3 through your diet, you need to supplement it, or it's a good idea to supplement it. You don't need to supplement anything, but it's a good idea to supplement it to make sure that you are getting sufficient omega-3 for optimal health. Okay, number 3 is micronutrients. So again, I'm smuggling a lot in here, right? If you think of all the vitamins and minerals that you are aware of, right? We need a lot of different vitamins and minerals, okay? And just like with proteins and fats, there is a bare minimum. This is what's called the RDA, the recommended daily allowance, that's actually kind of more of a minimum of what you need for good health. So you need a minimum amount. And if you don't get enough vitamin A or enough vitamin D or enough vitamin B, there are health consequences for that. And then there is a range from the minimum to sufficient to more optimal levels, and then there is too much. Okay, there are certain vitamins that if you take too much, like too much vitamin C, you're just going to piss it out. But there are some vitamins that accumulate in the body, like vitamin A. So if you have too much of it, it's not good for you because your body can't just get rid of the excess. So again, the dose makes the poison. Vitamins and minerals are good for you, but too much of a good thing, it can sometimes be toxic, right? When it comes to certain vitamins and minerals. Iron is another example. Too much of it, it's not good for you. So you need to be making sure that you're within sufficient to optimum ranges of each of these nutrients. Do you need to sort of trawl through every single vitamin and mineral? No, you don't. But if you just make sure that you're eating a varied diet, that's made up mostly of whole foods, you are going to be pretty healthy. And just an important thing that I want to say about micronutrients, about vitamins and minerals, is that people think, okay, vitamins and minerals, fruit and vegetables. And yes, there absolutely are a lot of vitamins and minerals in fruits and vegetables, but there are also a lot of micronutrients in other foods as well. Things like eggs, things like meat, things like fish, things like poultry, things like organ meats, things like dairy products. All of these things have a lot of micronutrients in them that are also important. And the thing is that they tend to complement each other. So what you get from fruits and vegetables, you tend to not get from meat and dairy and animal products. And the nutrients that you get, it's not just protein and things like red meat or organ meats, right? The nutrients, the micronutrients, the vitamins and minerals that you get from red meat and dairy products and all of that stuff tend to not be in fruits and vegetables. So when you eat both, you get all of the spectrum of all of the different micronutrients that you need. And a lot of women don't think about it that way. They think that meat is kind of like protein and that vitamins and minerals are just in fruits and vegetables, but that's not true. You're getting so many nutrients when you eat all of those other things that I mentioned, like eggs and like organ meats or poultry or like whatever it is. Dairy products as well, right? Dairy products have a lot of nutrients in them, and people tend to think of them as being bad for you. Again, it's about what you're getting from your diet, not what to cut out or to avoid from your diet. So a lot of people will think, oh, cut out dairy. Dairy's not healthy, but it's not true, right? Dairy is a really great source of protein. It's a great source of lots of different vitamins and minerals. So again, making sure that you're getting all of these things in balance is important. And another thing I want to introduce here is this idea of whole foods, okay? So all of those foods that I mentioned before, all of the different animal products, dairy, fruits and vegetables, whole grains, legumes, all of those foods, right? They are called whole foods. They're single ingredient, minimally processed foods. If your diet is mostly made up of those things, which it should be, you are going to be healthy. A lot of people rely a lot on heavily processed foods. So again, like processed, this should have been another one of my initial concepts, is that like this idea of like processed versus unprocessed, right? Not all processed foods are bad for you, right? A lot of processed foods, like things like yogurt, things like dairy products, these are processed, right? They don't grow like that on a tree. It's not like a slab of meat or like a piece of fruit, right? They're processed. Bread is processed, but it can be a very good part of a very healthy part of an overall healthy diet. Things like peanut butter that are often touted as like a really amazing like superfood. Guess what? They are ultra processed. We use a high powered blender to get peanuts down or other nuts and seeds down to a very, very smooth paste that doesn't split. These are ultra processed foods. They can be healthy. They can be a part of a healthy diet. But again, that dichotomy of processed versus unprocessed doesn't always work. It does to a certain degree. Again, I think the majority of your diet should come from these whole foods, these single ingredient, minimally processed whole foods, right? But there are examples of processed foods that can be helpful. Again, dairy products to a certain degree, nut butters, things like bread, and things like that. But for the most part, we want to focus on whole foods. If you do that, you're going to be super duper healthy. But I'm going to come back to this idea a little bit later. Okay, so number 4. So the fourth thing that you need to get from your diet is fiber, okay? And again, I'm smuggling in a lot here because there's lots of different types of fiber, okay? In different types of fruits and vegetables and legumes and beans and all of that kind of lentils and stuff like that. Lots and lots of different types of fiber. And we want a very big range of different types of fiber in our diet. We don't want just one type or another. That's why we want to vary our fiber sources. And this is another important concept because like fiber is really, really good for you. And it is true that most people need more fiber in their diets. Like the vast majority of people that I work with simply aren't eating enough fruit and vegetable in their diets. But it is also true that there is such a thing as too much fiber, and some people are eating way too much fiber, and it can cause a lot of gastric distress. And some people get very IBS-like symptoms, or they can't tolerate certain types of fiber or certain foods. A good example is like the nightshades group of like aubergines, onions, garlics, peppers. A lot of people can't tolerate the fiber in that. So, but they have in their head, oh, it's good for you, so I need to eat it anyway. Not if you don't tolerate the fiber that's in it. And again, there is a range that is healthy, right? There's such a thing as not getting enough fiber. Most people adding fiber to their diet is going to improve so many areas of their life. It's going to make them fuller. It's going to there's going to be a lot of like micronutrients that they need to get that they're getting from it. They're going to feel lighter. They're going to have better and more regular bowel movements. They're going to have better gut health, right? It's like not that complicated. You just need to eat more fiber. But again, there is such a thing as too much. Again, there's a kind of a minimum amount that you need. Otherwise, you're going to have problems. Then there's a kind of more ideal or sufficient amount, and then there's an optimal amount, and then there is too much. Okay, everything is on a scale, so you need to be making sure that you're getting the right amount. And then to just add a layer of complication to that, different people need different amounts of fiber. So some people, for example, men need a lot more than women do. I think women need 28 grams a day and men need about 38 grams a day. I might be a bit wrong on those numbers. But some people do well on an exceptionally high fiber diet, but it doesn't mean that you will, okay? A lot of vegans do really well on a very high fiber diet, but that doesn't mean that it's good for everyone. And too much fiber is probably not going to be good for most people. Again, that bell curve. This also explains a lot of like the carnivore stuff, right? Because some people don't do well with fiber at all. And if they cut it out of their lives, suddenly, all of their mysterious medical like conditions disappear. This is people like Jordan Peterson and his daughter Michaela, right? They had all these autoimmune diseases and problems, and when they switched to a carnivore diet, everything just evaporated. All these problems that they had been hospitalized for and had, chronic health conditions for just disappeared, right? That does happen for some people, but you got to remember that bell curves, right? There are people on the extremes, but there are very few of them. Most people gather around the mean, and you're probably the rule, not the exception. And you don't want to get sucked into the extremes of either side of either no fiber is killing us, fiber is really bad for you, or the other extreme of like you need more and more and more fiber in your diet, right? It's somewhere in between, okay? It's Goldilocks and the three bears. There's like too hot, too cold, and then there's just right. That's the same with a lot of things when it comes to nutrition. That also should have been one of my, introductory concepts. But anyway, a lot else is getting introduced here along the way. Okay, and the last thing that you need from your diet is water. Drinking water, eating it from fruits and vegetables, whatever. You need water, obviously, or you die. And I think that we can just leave it there, but it's pretty uncomplicated. Okay, so there are those 5 things that you need from your diet: protein, fat, micronutrients, fiber, and water. If you get enough of each of these things, you are going to be healthy, right? That's really all nutrition is about, okay? Obviously, there are individual things that you can tweak. Certain people do well with more or less of each thing. And often it's a lot to do with preference, although sometimes it's to do with, like what is actually good for you or not. Like, for example, fiber being a great case in point. And if you have the approach of like, okay, most of my diet is going to come from whole foods, I'm going to eat like a range of all of these things, I'm going to eat meals that include all of these things, right? You are going to be like 90% there in terms of overall health. That's really all there is to it and all you need to know. You might notice that I didn't include carbohydrates in that list. And that's because technically we can live without carbohydrates, like without, actual sources of like, more simple carbohydrates. Obviously there are carbohydrates in fruits and vegetables, which are going to come along with the fiber. But beyond that, we don't necessarily need carbohydrates, which is why I haven't included it in here. And if you don't eat protein, you'll get sick and die. If you don't eat vitamins and minerals, you'll get sick and die. But if you don't eat carbs, you won't get sick and die. You can still actually be very, very healthy, which is why I didn't include it here. But I don't want to go into a complicated thing about carbohydrates. Most people do well with some carbohydrates in their diet, and even with some white variety of carbohydrates in their diet. Most people don't do well on an ultra low carb diet. They usually don't feel their best on it, and they usually also, it's just so unbearable and so like difficult to sustain that it's just not feasible for most people. But most people do need to reduce their intake of sort of simple carbs, and most women are eating too many carbohydrates and fats and not enough proteins. But I'm going to leave that there. I'm going to do a separate podcast on carbohydrates because I think that's a really interesting topic. Okay, so part 3 of this like nutrition lesson, I want to talk about a few more concepts that are really, really important. So first of all, CICO, calories in, calories out, otherwise known as energy balance. Okay, a lot of people create a dichotomy online that it's not about calorie intake, it's about nutrients and it's about nutrition. And then other people say, no, nutrition doesn't matter. It's all about calories. It's all like, you only need to think about calories. Or a lot of people who are very into nutrition tend to misrepresent people who talk about calorie intake as like the kind of straw man. And the misrepresentation of people who talk about calories is that the only thing that matters is calories and nutrients don't matter at all. Your nutrition doesn't matter at all as long as you're eating the right number of calories. And that is not what most of us in the evidence-based nutrition and fat loss community are saying, okay? It is not a dichotomy. Both things are true and you need both things for overall health. You do need all of those nutrients that I listed before in order to be optimally healthy, but you also need the right number of calories for your body, okay? This is energy balance, okay? If your maintenance calories are 2,000 calories a day, right? Which the average woman, I think, is actually lower than that. But let's just take 2,000 calories a day. And and you're a healthy body weight and you're a healthy body fat percentage. If your maintenance calories is 2,000 calories a day, you need to eat the right number of calories for you in order to be healthy. If you undereat and you don't eat enough, that is not healthy. If you chronically overeat and you eat too many calories for you, even if you're eating in a 200 calorie surplus every day, the weight is going to creep on, and excess adipose tissue, excess body fat is not healthy for us. So if you creep like up in weight and gain 10, 20 kilos over a decade or two, that is also not healthy, okay? If you need 2,000 calories to maintain your weight and you eat 3,000 calories a day, that's obviously not healthy either. If you eat just 1,000 calories a day, that isn't healthy either. There is a range that is going to be healthy for you. You need to eat the right number of calories for your goals as well. If you want to maintain your weight, you need to eat at your maintenance calories. If you want to lose body fat, you need to be in a calorie deficit. And that is not necessarily unhealthy if you are in a sensible deficit of like 20%, and two, if you are ensuring that you're getting all the nutrients that you need from those calories. So let's take a specific example. Your maintenance calories are 2,000 calories a day. A 20% deficit would be 1,600 calories a day, right? You're consuming less food than someone else who's eating at maintenance calories. But if you're ensuring that your 1,600 calories are coming from those whole foods and giving you all the nutrients that you need, then you are going to be healthier than somebody who is eating 2,000 calories of junk every day and not getting the stuff that they need. Okay. So, people make this false dichotomy of like, it's not about calories, it's about nutrition. It's about both. Okay. You need to eat the right number of calories for your needs and for your goals. And you also need to eat the right amount of each nutrient for your health. Okay. Both are important and both make up health. Okay. Because even if you eat, if you take another example, if you eat all really healthy foods, but you eat 3,000 calories a day, and you're eating in 1,000 calorie surplus, this is not healthy for you. Even if you're eating all the right foods, you're eating a super healthy, super balanced diet, but you're eating in a 200 calorie surplus every day, okay? Like 2,200 calories, and the weight's creeping on slowly over time. This is also not optimal health, okay? So you need the right number of calories for you, and you need the right nutrients. You need both. There isn't a dichotomy here. It's not one or the other. Both matter. And calorie intake or otherwise called energy balance, is also an important part of health. Okay, it's taught on every single nutrition course. We know this is an important part of health. Chronically under-consuming or over-consuming calories is not good for us. And we need to be getting all the nutrients that we need from the calories that we are consuming. Okay, so both are important, and calories is just as important a part of long-term health as the nutrient side of things. Okay, next concept is flexible dieting. Okay, so this is an 80-20 approach to nutrition. And the idea here is that there is no such thing as healthy or unhealthy foods. There are only healthy or unhealthy diets. Okay, and if we go back to that idea that I said before of getting most of your nutrition from whole foods, single ingredient whole foods, that is what we call flexible dieting. Or flexible dieting is the implementation of that. The 80% is whole foods, right? Is getting, if 80% of your diet comes from nutritious foods, whole foods, minimally processed foods, the other 20% is what we call discretionary calories. Okay, so that can include junk food that has no nutritional value. Okay, as long as it is within the context of an otherwise healthy diet and you're getting everything that you need from your diet, and if it's within the context of the right number of calories for your body. So if we go back to our example of 2,000 calories a day, okay? Let's say you're eating at maintenance calories. So 80% of your calories are 1,600 calories. If you are getting 1,600 calories from whole foods, minimally processed, healthy foods, right? The other 20% can come from junk, right? It can come from fast food. It can come from chocolate, ice cream, what I call fun foods, okay? I think fun foods is a better term than junk food. It's just more neutral. You have to remember these types of foods are calorie dense, they're hyper palatable, they're very easy to overeat, and we do tend to over consume them in our modern diets. But if they are consumed with an 80-20 approach to nutrition, if they make up no more than 20% of your overall calorie intake, and they are consumed within the context of the right number of calories for your body, it's fine, right? Again, nobody is saying that they are good for you. They're just saying that you can have an overall healthy diet even if you consume some of these foods, okay? So again, going back to that idea of it's not about what you cut out. It's not about what you avoid. It's about what you include in your diet. And if you're ensuring that you're including all of those things that I mentioned before, and 80% of your diet is coming from that good stuff, the other 20% can be a bit of rubbish, right? It doesn't matter. They're called discretionary calories. In an ideal world, would you be healthier if 100% of your diet came from whole foods? Yes, obviously. Obviously, that is healthier. Nobody is saying that junk foods are or fun foods are healthy, okay? But two different things can be true. They can be not healthy, but you can also be overall healthy if you are consuming them within the context of all of those other things that I mentioned, if you aren't over consuming them, if you're consuming them in moderation. Okay, so yes, they are not healthy. Yes, it would be better to have 100% of your diet coming from whole foods, but in reality, this is very, very hard to stick to because there just are fun foods around. You go to a birthday party, you go out for something to eat, you have a stressful day, like that food is yummy. So again, it comes down to that idea of trade-offs. It would be better maybe to not have these foods at all, but that's very, very difficult to implement. And it often leads to then binging on these foods later on. And so there is a trade-off there, right? If trying to be perfect in your diet causes you to binge later on, well, the trade-off is that it would be better for you to have a less perfect diet, but not binge on this stuff and have your consumption of these things under control, and also not become a mental issue that causes you a lot of guilt and anxiety. Okay, so remember, there are no healthy foods or no healthy or unhealthy foods. There is only healthy and unhealthy diets. And if you are getting everything you need from your diet in the right quantities, a little bit of fun food isn't going to kill you, okay? And just going back to some of those initial concepts that I introduced, like everything is a poison. It's just a case of dosage. Okay, so even things like sugar, white sugar, oh my God, there is a certain amount that your body can deal with, and it's just not that big of a deal, and it doesn't matter, and it can just be part of your day-to-day life, and it's not a problem. Too much sugar is not good for you and can cause a lot of health problems, but that doesn't mean that sugar in small quantities is deleterious to your health. You can include it in an overall healthy diet. Okay, just quickly, supplements. I've done a whole separate podcast on supplements, but basically, my big message with supplements is there are no supplements that you need. There's nothing that you need to take, okay? If you want to take some supplements, you want to take the things that are going to give you the biggest bang for your buck in terms of your health, and the best things that you can take are a multivitamin, omega-3 fatty acid, and protein powder can be really helpful for some people to get enough protein. Just simple whey protein powder is perfectly fine. Again, an example of a processed food that can be healthy for you in the right quantities and contexts. But you do not have to take any of these supplements, right? You do not have to take a multivitamin, omega-3, or protein powder in order to be healthy. You can get everything you need from your diet, and you certainly don't need things like high-dose magnesium. You don't need things like collagen. You don't need fat burners for sure, or detoxes or anything like that. And if you want to know more about my take on supplements, listen to my podcast on supplements. I'll link it below. But they are, the hint is in the name, right? They are supplements to your diet. They are supposed to supplement your diet. They are not, the first line of defense with these with getting the nutrients that you need. You can get all the nutrients you need from your diet, and then you can fill in the gaps with supplements. And just to highlight a couple of things that are really big at the moment, things like seed oils, right? Like Americans are like losing their minds over seed oils right now. Seed oils are not the problem. Seed oils, again, can be part of an overall healthy diet. If you're eating the right number of calories and you're getting all the nutrients that you need, some seed oils in there, it's not going to have any impact on your health whatsoever. Cutting seed oils out isn't going to have any impact on your health altogether. The reason why seed oils are bad for people's health is because they are usually consumed in the context of fast food and like very, very calorie dense, ultra processed, highly palatable foods, right? They're used in all of the like junk food that we like to buy. They're used in fast foods. It's not the seed oils that are making them unhealthy. It is the fact that they have these foods are very, very low in nutrients, very, very high in calories, and ultra palatable. That's what makes these foods unhealthy. And replacing the seed oils with something else like beef tallow is not going to make them healthier at all. And it's not going to solve America's health problem or obesity problem. Okay. So again, there are always things online that are like, this is bad for you. This is bad for you. And it's mostly just hyperbolic. It's mostly just sensational. It's not actually looking at the big picture of health. Artificial sweeteners are another one that I just wanted to touch on for a moment, because a lot of people are worried about artificial sweeteners and other artificial things in their diet. You don't have to worry about it. There's nothing about artificial sweeteners that are completely safe for human consumption. Remember the appeal to nature fallacy. Just because something's natural doesn't mean it's healthy, and just because something is artificial doesn't mean it's bad for your health. The way artificial sweeteners work, which most people don't know and I find really interesting, is that sugars are the sweetness of certain sugars are sort of compared to each other on a scale of sweetness. And I think fructose is like 0.8 on this scale, whereas like table sugar is like 1 on this scale. Okay. And then like something like, I don't know, maltose, whatever, like lactose is like sweeter than table sugar, so it's like 1.2 or 1.5 or something like that, right? So you have like a bit of variety in terms of sweetness of different sugars, like per gram or whatever. If you take artificial sweeteners, right, they are so high in sweetness, they rank like 200 or 500 on this scale of sweetness. So if you think that most natural sugars are just like hovering around 1 and being compared to each other in terms of like, 0.2 in terms of sweetness, think how sweet something is like a 200 or a 500 on that same scale. What that means in practice is that in order to get the same amount of sweetness in, say, a litre of Coke or a litre of a soft drink, you need 200th of the amount of the artificial sweetener than you would need for the sugar. So the quantities are just so low, like that it's, even if these products, these substances have been tested at very high doses, and they are bad for organisms at extremely high doses, but we're having such small amounts in our food that it doesn't matter. Again, you got to remember the dose makes the poison. If something is toxic at very, very, very high levels, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's toxic for you as well at very low levels. Remember, water is toxic for us at very high levels. If we drink too much of it, it kills us. Okay, but at a certain concentration, at a certain like intake, it's perfectly healthy for us. Okay, so you got to remember those sorts of concepts when you're thinking about things like artificial sweeteners. What we're getting in like a glass of like a sweet drink or a diet drink is so little of this substance that it's just negligible to our health. It just really doesn't matter. And you would have to consume something like 600 cans of Coke or 6,000 cans of Coke or something like that in one day in order to reach the toxic levels. And there are a lot of other things like that where you can talk about preservatives or food dyes and things like that like, yes, overall, like, an overconsumption of these things probably isn't good. But if we're consuming them, again, within the context of an otherwise healthy diet and within the context of the right number of calories for you, and for your children, it's just not an issue, and it doesn't need to be this big drama. Okay, so that was almost an hour. It's obviously long, but I hope my big hope with this podcast is to simplify and demystify the topic of nutrition for you. The bit that I actually did on nutrition itself is only like, on what you need from your diet, is only like 20 minutes long. It's all the other concepts that go into it that we need in order to have a healthy approach to nutrition and to not be all or nothing about nutrition when it comes to our diet, and to not get sucked in to some of the very scary, very appealing narratives that get really like exacerbated and amplified on social media, that are really not good for us, okay? And really not true. So, hopefully there's a lot of concepts that I threw in here, but these are great concepts for, being a little bit more chill about your nutrition and about what you're eating and what your kids are eating as well. But also these are concepts that apply to lots of other areas of life. If you found that helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you gave the video a like, sent it to a friend that you think would find this reframing really, really helpful. Subscribe to my channel and all of that kind of stuff. It really does help. And if you could stick in the comments below, any topics that you want me to cover in terms of podcasts, I'd really appreciate it. It helps me get a good idea of what to talk about and how to talk about it. And if you need help with your weight loss, with your overall nutrition, talk to me. I have a really great online coaching program. The main focus of it is fat loss and strength building, but nutrition is obviously an important part of that. It's just like a part of it. It's not the whole thing. So talk to me about that if you need help with your nutrition, if you need help with fat loss, if you need help with your training. I would love to help you simplify and figure out all of those things. Anyway, thanks for listening. This was the Healthy Middle Ground podcast with me, Jen Curtis.